In fact, one story that I came across very, very early on was one from a surgeon in the United States by the name of Dr. Michael Claper. He worked on the night shift there in New York, and often at those times, working at those hours, he would take blood samples himself because nurses often would not work at those hours. So one time he looked at a blood sample of a patient of his that had a heart attack, and he saw this white mucus floating above the blood, and he sort of looked at him at that, and he thought, I wonder what this is. And he then decided he was going to ask his patient, which he calls Mr. Phillips, and he was going to ask him after he did his triple bypass on him what was actually in the arteries. But before he asked him that, he said, well, what were you eating and drinking just before you had your heart attack? And his answer was that he had I think it was a thick shake and some sort of a quarter pounder or a Big Mac or something like this. And he thought, my goodness, what he had seen is the saturated animal fat had gone straight through into his bloodstream and actually caused a blockage. And what Michael Claper actually said, and he says this quite a lot, is he said that out of doing about 10,000 of these operations, he says he's always found that it's either fat or cholesterol that's causing a blockage. And he says that not once has he found broccoli or tofu in there. And so that also got me thinking and looking at and investigating this a little bit further. So, but what I was really interested in is what foods were creating this acidity and what foods were encouraging alkalinity. When you do your research, you find that there's different charts and we've got different classifications for different foods. But what is pretty much universally accepted is that certain foods are always going to be acidic, and for example, foods like alcohol, vinegar, sugars, meat, dairy, fish, processed grains, even certain and most raw grains, not raw but unprocessed grains, also are acidic. And then you have certain foods that are alkaline, and they're mostly the plant foods. Most vegetables, with the exception of the white potato, and then certain nuts and certain seeds are also alkalizing. But most tables that you find talk about pretty much all fruits being very alkaline. However, and that's what I was under the impression of, and until I also did some further research. But I found that when you have a lot of fruits, they are mostly alkaline as long as they don't have too much fructose. But the assumption is that when you actually decompose or break down the fruit and you measure the ash, it's usually very, very alkaline. But what they're not measuring is the effect of fructose, because fructose, when it goes into the intestine and when it's in the bloodstream, it starts to ferment. And when it ferments into effectively alcohol, ethyl alcohol and acetaldehyde. And that creates a very acid environment, and that's not normally considered when a lot of people are checking the alkalinity of sweet fruits. So that is why that there's a difference where some people call sweet fruits, all of them, to be alkaline, where when you look at the real effect on digestion, you'll see that they can be actually quite acidic. Whereas the sour fruits, the ones that don't have a lot of fructose in them, like grapefruits, like lemons and limes, they're very alkalizing. Now, ironically, when you mention that a lemon is alkalizing, people say, well, hang on a second, that's a citrus fruit. And we know it's got citric acid, so how can you say that is alkaline? Well, the answer to that is that, yes, it's true that you've got citric acid in there, but that's only a small component of what makes up a whole lemon. When the lemon gets eaten, or you make lemon juice out of it and you drink the lemon juice, what happens is that the citric acid gets neutralized by a number of alkalizing elements in the body. For example, when it goes into the mouth, our saliva is mostly fairly alkaline, and there is what we call enzymes in our alkaline, in our saliva, and most people know about amylase, which is a fairly acidic enzyme, but very few people know that there are other enzymes that we call them enzymes, but are alkaline buffers like sodium bicarbonate that are neutralizing those acids. And then as that food goes down into the stomach, then what happens is digestion starts occurring, and then you start getting all of the other elements that start getting released, and things like potassium, like calcium, like magnesium, manganese, and so forth. And they're very alkalizing elements, and so they have a net alkalizing effect on the body. So something that is perceived as being acidic, like a lemon, is in actual fact alkalizing, because that is the overall effect that it contributes to the body. But something like an orange that has a high fructose level, that would be acidic, because unless you get all of that fructose converted into energy into your cells immediately, chances are, and that's not going to happen, then that will create some acidity. So that's where the real distinction is in terms of those sorts of foods.